The cuts announced this week hardly came out of the blue, but the country's still grappling with the sheer scale of them. So far, the big row's been about who the biggest losers will be. But could slashing state provision make us more self-sufficient and leave us in a better state? With the cuts made official this week, the UK is set for a new age of austerity. Could it actually be good for us? Our national folklore is that at times of adversity, the country pulls together and is the stronger for it. In the Second World War, the nation was drawn together by the Blitz spirit. Neighbours helped each other. We grew more of our own food. We sheltered together, and we survived together. As the cuts bite, can that same Blitz spirit lead us to rediscover the values of self-reliance, but also cooperation and altruism that some say the welfare state has eroded? The years of boom brought a frenzy of consumerism. But has the relentless pursuit of material wealth left us any happier? Or left us lonelier and spiritually bankrupt? Could austerity force us to focus on what really matters in life?
Oh, happy day.
This transport service in London relies on volunteers. The state funding they've received is now under threat. They will only survive if the public steps in.
We are the big society. We're doing it right here in Croydon. We're using a large level of volunteer support. People are helping each other, often for nothing, working long hours.
Critics say the cuts will leave many people poverty-stricken. Others predict a surge in charity. At this supermarket, people are already donating food for the needy. According to this charity, some people are only 6 weeks away from having a salary to needing their help.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, hopefully. Got one more ball.
But should the poorest have to rely on charity? And won't the £18 billion of welfare cuts just punish the most vulnerable? The coalition is pinning its hopes on reigniting the British sense of self-reliance that it says has been withered by decades of benefits culture. Nobody doubts the cuts will be painful, particularly for the poorest. But could austerity also reconnect us with something that's been missing? A richer inner life, less dependent on material goods and the state. Well, Douglas, do we face a leaner, stronger state or a nastier, crueler one, some claim?
Well, it's certainly not going to be like the Blitz. Look, what's been happening is that for some years now, this country has been living way beyond its means. There's nothing moral about borrowing money that gets our grandchildren and great-grandchildren into debt. That's what's been happening. Like any household, the country has to balance its books. It can't borrow beyond its means. That's what we've been doing. That's what has to stop.
All right, I know Derek and George want to have their say on this, but that is the question for our text vote today. Could the cuts actually be good for us? If you think they could, text the word vote followed by yes, but if you disagree, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate, and for full terms and conditions visit bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live. We'll bring you the result of that vote at the end of the programme. Reverend George Hargreaves, you are a compassionate Christian. Presumably you oppose cutting.
No, I don't.
Even for the poorest?
Listen, the first thing you've got to ask is not whether it's good, it's whether it's necessary. And if it is necessary, then it's good. You know, this is a discipline that we need to get into our fiscal management. And all discipline is hard. Nobody likes discipline. But the last government actually has taken us to the brink of bankruptcy, and something has to be done.
How can it be good for the poorest, some would argue, if you're going to cut support for them?
Now, you've got to look at this in the round. First and foremost, it will not be good for the poorest if we go bankrupt. If we are so laden with debt repayment, interest repayments, that we haven't got the money to run a welfare state, whether we like it or not.
OK, well,
so
I can see Douglas I can see you nodding your head, but I can see Derek Hatton has already crossed his legs, crossed his arms, and sighed deeply. Derek?
I mean, somewhere along the line, I mean, it's got very little to do with whether or not it works or it doesn't. And I'm sick of hearing this bit about rocky roads and being hard and being disciplined, as though that's the new psyche we've got to get into. It's like a macho thing, you know. Let's the harder we get and the rockier the road, the better it is, you know. I mean, you've got to remember, you look at those particular, you look at George Osborne, anybody who had could add any real misgivings about the actual issues, just watch George Osborne sit down. David Cameron put his arm around him, they both laughed and they smiled. What were they laughing and smiling about? That they just made 500,000 people redundant. How can anybody smile or laugh at that? But you've also, George, you've also got to ask yourself, you know, you're talking about a rocky road. You're talking about David Cameron, right? David Cameron, public school and Oxford. You're talking about George Osborne, public school in Oxford, one an aristocrat, one a descendant of William the Fourth. They wouldn't know a rocky road if they fell over one.
Let me just say, as public school in Oxford, let me come back and say, you know, public school in Oxford does not mean that you don't know what goes on the ground. I see people come into my church, into my office, with problems on the ground. I work at the coalface, but I know that at the coalface, the way that the Labour government ran the country for the past over a decade has really put us in problems that somebody has to do something about.
Douglas, you haven't had a chance to come back after your initial comment, but I just want to ask, firstly, Derek Hatton says there's something macho about asking the question, could it be good for us? So firstly, what's your response to that? And secondly, as a defender of them, do you think there is something about how people accept this message when it comes from people who they accuse of never having faced these problems in their life?
Sure, I mean, the first thing is, I do actually agree. I mean, there is an element in this of sort of talking, this is going to be tough, this is going to be difficult. Politicians like speaking like that. That's a political disease. That doesn't really, you know, challenge the issue. The issue is that actually George underestimated what the last government did. I'm not a party political person, so I'm not making a party political point, but they didn't just take us near bankruptcy, they took us way beyond bankruptcy to a situation where we were borrowing at a level which cannot be sustained. It cannot be sustained at what we are doing. So the question then is how you get out of this. Now, I agree, for a lot of people it looks, they think, oh, they see David Cameron, they see George Osborne, they think, oh, it's easy for you guys to say this. The truth is, look, we elect politicians to try to make decisions on our behalf. Anyone who took over this last election was going to have to make these decisions. If it had have been David Miliband or Ed Miliband in charge, they'd have done it, because the fact is that Gordon Brown wrecked the economy and couldn't admit it.
The issue, though, now, quite apart from the party politics, as you've said, is this going to be good for us? Anna Bird is from the Fawcett Society. Is this going to be good for women, Anna?
Well, we're really concerned that it's actually going to set women back a generation. Excuse me, it set women back a generation, and we're really concerned about the impact of the cuts on women's equality. And I think that's something we should bear in mind. I think there are three key things that happened this week in the spending review that we can identify as being really concerning for women's equality. The first one is these huge job losses we're going to see over the next 4 years. We're looking at 500,000 job losses. 65% of the public sector workforce is women, so we're going to see twice as many women lose their jobs as men. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens to those women. We're really concerned about what is going to happen with the rising female unemployment and how the government's going to tackle that. Secondly, we're really concerned about this concentration of cuts on the benefits bill, because women are more likely to be in receipt of benefits than men. So, for example,
well, that's two very clear points you've made there. Just quickly, if you can make your third point, and I'll put those to our guests here.
Yeah, I suppose the third point is really that where we're going to see public services rolled back, women already provide the majority of care in the home for older people, for children, and we think that where those services disappear, women are going to be expected to fill in the gaps, and it might make the choices for women, their ability to go out and work, the economics of doing that, more difficult.
Okay, we don't have a woman in the studio, but Douglas?
Well, if I can just, the first thing in particular, 500,000 unemployed. Look, this is a fallacious argument. The state sector, the public sector, has grown terribly obese in recent years, in recent decades indeed, under Tory and Labour governments. That needs to be cut in order to allow private enterprise
Is
the
it
opportunity to flourish.
is it moral if there is a disproportionate effect on women? Can you defend the cuts?
I don't accept there is a disproportionate effect on women, but the point is that this country has to be able to pay for itself. The public sector does not create wealth, the private sector does. If you penalise the sector that actually creates wealth and protect the one that does not, you have the situation we're currently in, so we need those job losses.
From the Fawcett Society, and this evidence has been collated, that it is going to be disproportionately hard on women. Can you still argue that the cuts are good for us?
I simply don't accept that is the case. People will be made unemployed, but that does not mean that they are unemployed in perpetuity. Okay. It means that they will hopefully be employed by other sectors of the economy.
You're missing a point. You've got to look behind why are there so many women in the public sector. This came out of a policy to actually have, as a part of the equalities agenda, many of the jobs in the public sector were actually skewed towards women. And we saw this particularly, I've got to say this, in the black community, where there was a time when the best person to employ in a local government was a black woman, which meant that a lot of black men...
You don't want to see them lose their jobs?
No, we don't want to see it, but what I'm saying, there's 849,000 extra public sector workers since Labour got in. That's almost 1 million more. You're growing a government, a public sector, which, as Douglas says, doesn't actually make money, it spends money.
Let's speak to somebody who represents a good number of those workers. Eamon Coy, an officer, trade union officer for the GMB.